Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin.
It was a Tuesday morning, and I was sitting at the kitchen counter, sipping my coffee and flipping through landscaping estimates for the backyard. The sun was barely up. I was still in pajama pants, and the last thing I expected was a knock that sharp. That knock, like a summons. Not urgent, not polite, demanding. I froze. My stomach dropped before I even got to the door. I peeked through the peephole. Of course, my parents. Dad stood like he was guarding a courtroom entrance, arms crossed, eyes locked on the door like he could will it open. Mom clutched a folder against her chest like it was a Bible or a subpoena, something righteous and absolute. Both were dressed like they were on their way to a shareholder meeting. I opened the door 3 inches, already regretting it. Before I could get a word out, Dad pushed it open and stepped inside. Mom followed, heels clicking against the hardwood like she owned the place. I didn't even get a hi. "This is about your living conditions," Dad said, "and your lack of long-term planning." No warm-up, just full blast. Mom unzipped the folder like she was revealing Exhibit A. She pulled out a stack of documents and started lining them up on my kitchen counter, not even waiting for an invitation to sit down. Like this was a presentation and I was already late to the meeting. "We've found you a practical solution," she said. Her voice was calm, but she had that look. Like I was a failing project she was determined to fix. I hadn't said a word yet. I leaned back against the fridge and crossed my arms. Quick note before we go further. Before listening, share which city or country you're watching from. I already knew how this was going to go. There wasn't going to be a discussion. This was a mission. They weren't here to talk through options. They were here to push through a plan they cooked up without me. The air felt tight. My coffee sat on the counter, cooling. I looked at the papers. Crisp, stapled, color-coded tabs. "This isn't an ambush," Mom added, smoothing out one of the sheets. "We're just trying to help." "Sure, like a wrecking ball helps a house get better airflow." Dad stood behind her, nodding once, like the verdict was already in. I didn't move, didn't blink. I just reached out, picked up the top paper, and started reading. Because if they were going to treat me like a child, I might as well do the grown-up thing and actually read the terms of my own ambush. The top sheet was a glossy brochure, thick paper, full color. On the cover was a stock photo of a young couple holding a golden retriever in front of a brand new condo complex. The headline read, "Westview Park, where home begins." I looked up slowly. Dad pointed at the page like he was revealing a secret blueprint. "It's a starter unit. 1 bedroom, west side of town. Affordable, low maintenance. HOA handles all the exterior work." Mom jumped in, flipping it open. In-unit laundry, granite counters, private parking, controlled access, modern fixtures. "This is a perfect step forward for you." Her eyes lit up like she was selling it on live TV. She even circled a few phrases with a pen. Investment potential, secure neighborhood, ideal for young professionals. I didn't even ask how they got this. It was obvious. They'd planned this. Sat at their kitchen table, probably with spreadsheets and wine, mapping out a future I never asked for. Dad stepped closer. "Rent is dead money. You've been throwing it away for what, 7 years now? At your age, you should be planning roots, building equity. This condo is a real opportunity." I kept my tone neutral. "I like where I live." Dad scoffed like I'd just said I enjoy mold. "That's not the point. You're 30. Time to stop playing house and start thinking long-term." Mom laid another page on the counter, a breakdown of average rents versus mortgage payments. "This is doable for you. You'd pay less each month owning this than you do renting here." I stared at the photos of a staged living room and fake potted plants. "I'm not looking to move. I'm fine here." "That's short-sighted," Dad said. "This place doesn't even have a garage. Or resale value." I stayed calm, biting my tongue. "It has what I need. It's close to work. I like the neighborhood." "But it's temporary," he cut in. "You're living like a college student on an extended break. It's time to make adult decisions." Mom added, "We already checked your credit. You'd qualify with a cosigner. We've got good scores, that gives you leverage." I blinked. "You ran my credit." "We spoke to a mortgage advisor. Hypothetically," Dad said quickly, "we didn't apply for anything." "Jesus," I muttered, stepping back. Dad straightened up. "You think this is an invasion? We're trying to help you get serious about your future." You're making a bunch of assumptions about what I want, what I can afford. Mom raised both hands, palms open. We're just trying to show you options. This isn't pressure. Bullshit, I said flat. You came here with documents, a pre-picked condo, and a whole financial plan. Dad's jaw tightened. So now it's bullshit to want better for your kid. It's bullshit to make decisions for your kid without asking. He slammed the brochure down. You're avoiding adulthood. You'd rather coast than commit. You've always chosen ease over effort. My face burned, but I kept my voice steady. I work. I pay my bills. I don't owe you a condo. That's your standard, he snapped. Bare minimum survival. Mom jumped in again, trying to play peacekeeper. Look, we just think this is the smarter move. In 10 years, you'll thank us. I laughed, short and cold, for pushing me into something I didn't ask for. Dad leaned forward. You'll thank us for getting you to stop wasting your life in neutral. I didn't say anything, just looked down at the damn dog on the brochure. Happy couple, big smile, clean floors, generic and empty as hell. Mom pushed the whole packet toward me, gentle like it was fragile. Just read through it. That's all we're asking. I didn't touch it. I walked to the sink, dumped my cold coffee, and turned on the faucet. The sound of running water didn't faze them. They just kept going. Dad pulled a folded sheet from his pocket, already creased and worn like he'd been carrying it around, waiting for the right moment. You've spent over $190,000 in rent since 22. That's money you'll never see again. Mom opened the folder again, round 2. We broke it down year by year. Look. She handed me a spreadsheet with columns, bolded numbers, and footnotes. Even at conservative appreciation rates, you'd be sitting on at least $70,000 in equity by now. I didn't take the paper. She laid it flat on the counter like it was evidence in court. Dad circled the kitchen slowly, looking up at the cabinets. Particle board, no crown molding. These'll chip by winter. He knocked on one. This place was never built to last. He moved into the living room next, checking the baseboards, the carpet, the light fixtures. You're paying premium rent for subpar finishes. I leaned against the sink, arms crossed, watching them turn my home into a teardown. Mom pulled out another sheet. Amortization schedules, fixed versus variable rates, best case and worst case scenarios. We even accounted for insurance and HOA fees. You guys built a whole portfolio, I muttered. We're not trying to push, she said, like handing someone a loaded gun and saying, no pressure. Dad was at the window now, staring out at the backyard. No usable space. You could get a balcony at Westview, grill out, host people. I host people just fine, I said. He ignored that. You've boxed yourself into a lifestyle that doesn't grow. They were building to something. I could feel it. The pacing, the rhythm, like a sales pitch before the closing line. Mom spread out 3 more sheets, a sample mortgage app, a list of comparable condos sold in the area, and an interest rate tracker. We looked at this from all angles. This isn't just emotional, it's financial logic. I didn't say a word. Dad came back around and leaned on the counter, palms down, like he was locking me in. We'll co-sign. I looked up. We can help, he said, but you have to meet us halfway. You've already done all the legwork without me. Because we knew you'd resist, he shot back. You get defensive when we bring up the future. Mom nodded. This is us giving you a launch pad? We're not handing you a house. We're helping you buy one, responsibly. You think I'm irresponsible? I asked, low and even. We think you've been coasting, Dad answered. You've made choices based on comfort, not progression. Mom added, and now we're offering you stability. I looked around my own kitchen. Same counters I wiped every night. Same cabinets I stocked myself. My home, suddenly on trial. Dad slid the co-signing agreement across the counter. You're not in this alone. No, I said quietly. I'm clearly not. Mom tilted her head. Why does this feel like a fight? We're on your side. No, I repeated louder. You're on your plan. Not mine. They didn't respond right away. Just stood there waiting. Like if they gave me enough silence, I'd eventually cave. I didn't. I picked up the spreadsheet with the amortization tables, folded it twice, and handed it back. I folded the spreadsheet, pressed it back into Mom's hand, and said, flat out, I'm not buying the condo. The room shifted. Dad's shoulders squared. His jaw clenched so tight I could see the vein in his temple. Mom blinked fast, lips parted like she was buffering. For a second, they both just stood there, like I'd spoken another language. Dad was the first to break. You're making a mistake. I'm making my decision, I said. You're 30 years old and still drifting through life, he snapped. No real plan, just vibes and temporary fixes. I have a plan. You just don't like that you're not part of it. Mom gave a soft laugh, but it wasn't amused. You've always taken the easy road. Since high school, the minute something got hard, you'd find a way to coast. That one stung, more than I wanted to admit. I looked at her, hard. You mean I didn't follow the road you picked? She didn't answer, just opened the folder again and pulled out a printed timeline. Columns, deadlines, boxes to check. Dad slid it across the counter toward me. We already confirmed availability. Inspection windows next Tuesday. Application should be submitted by Friday. Closing can happen before the end of next month. I didn't touch it, Mom said. The realtor's expecting your call. We put you down as interested but finalizing paperwork. You what? Dad nodded, serious. We've done the hard part. You just need to follow through. You already told someone I'm buying it. It was a soft confirmation, he said, non-binding. That's not the point. Mom placed her hand on the schedule like she was blessing it. We're not trying to railroad you. But you clearly needed help getting started. You think I'm lazy? I said, staring at both of them. That I don't want to grow up. Dad didn't deny it. We think you're stuck. That you've settled into comfort and called it a lifestyle. And you think signing a 30-year mortgage fixes that. Mom stepped in, softer now. It's about setting roots, building something, not living month to month. I'm not living like that, I said. You just assume I am. Because look at your place, Dad snapped, waving a hand around like he was pointing at a crime scene. You're clinging to a rental with no equity, no security, no direction. You don't see the direction. That doesn't mean it's not there, he scoffed. So what? You're planning on staying in this shoebox forever. If I want to, yeah? Mom reached out with the schedule again, holding it between two fingers like it was an olive branch. Just go to the inspection. No pressure to buy. Just see it. I looked at her. If I go and I still say no, are you going to accept it? Silence. Dad said, you'll say no because you're afraid. That's what this is. I walked over to the front door and opened it. Neither moved. Seriously, Dad asked. You came in here like this was your house, I said. Like I was a child who needed rescuing. You didn't ask. You showed up with a plan and expected me to fall in line. We've done everything we can, Mom said, voice tight. Exactly, I said. You did everything. I wasn't part of it. They didn't leave right away. Mom looked back at the folder like it could still do the convincing for her. Dad muttered something under his breath and finally stepped out. I shut the door behind them and locked it. Then I turned around and saw the inspection schedule still sitting on my kitchen counter, right where they left it. Center stage, like it belonged there. I picked it up and slid it straight into the trash. They came back the next morning. Didn't even knock this time. Just rang the doorbell like we hadn't just argued for hours the day before. I should have let it ring. I didn't. They walked in like they were still on mission. Same folder, same energy. Dad went straight to the living room like we'd scheduled a damn meeting. Mom sat down on the edge of the couch, folder already open on her lap. Dad didn't waste time. We slept on it. And we think this resistance is coming from fear, not logic. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Fear of what? Of responsibility, he said. Of locking something down. Mom held up the schedule again, like I hadn't trashed the first one. It's all still doable. You haven't missed the window. I told you no. You said it in the heat of the moment, she replied. We're giving you another chance to think clearly. My jaw tightened. I didn't move. Dad pointed to one of the printouts. This place right here, it's draining your money. Every month more rent down the drain. We calculated it again last night. Of course they did. Mom said, you're throwing away $1,700 a month. $1,735, Dad corrected. Right, she nodded. $1,735 for a place you'll never own. Over 5 years, that's over $100,000 gone. I stood there, letting them talk, letting it all pile up. They were so convinced I needed saving, they hadn't once stopped to ask why I wasn't panicking, why I wasn't scrambling for a solution. Mom smiled too softly. Look, we're not trying to insult your independence. We just want to help you make a smart move. Dad leaned forward. You're not broke. We know that. But you're also not making enough to buy a place like this. You've got to be realistic about what you can afford. I walked out of the room without a word. Dad called after me. Don't walk away from the conversation just because you're uncomfortable. I didn't answer. I walked down the hall to my office, pulled open the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, and grabbed the folder. Thick, black, heavy. Not some slapped-together printout from Zillow. This was the real thing. When I came back into the living room, they were both sitting upright, quiet, eyes on me. I dropped the folder on the coffee table, hard enough to get their attention. I opened it, took out the deed, and laid it flat. I already own this townhouse. Silence. Mom looked like she forgot how to blink. Dad tilted his head like I just handed him a puzzle with missing pieces. She leaned forward and picked up the paper. Read the name, read it again. Dad stared at the signature line like it was written in code. But how? Mom turned to me. This is real. I sat down across from them. Yes. Dad blinked slowly. Your salary doesn't cover it, I cut in. I know. That's what you're stuck on, right? Mom nodded. We assumed. You assumed wrong. They both looked completely thrown, like the floor had shifted under them. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. Before this, I worked in corporate finance. 6 years, asset management, high-paying, high-burnout job. I saved, I invested, I watched the market. Then I found this place, foreclosed, under market, and I bought it through a holding company before it ever hit the main listings. They just stared. Mom looked down at the deed again, flipping the pages like she expected it to disappear. I've been paying property tax, insurance, maintenance. This isn't a rental. It's mine. Dad still hadn't spoken, just looked at the papers like he was trying to spot the forgery. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, pulled out 2 coffee mugs and set them on the counter. You came in here talking about rent and waste and coasting, I said, but you never thought to ask if I already made my move? Mom's hands dropped to her lap. The deed still sat between them, center of the coffee table, loud and undeniable. Mom still had the deed in her lap when I came back into the room with a second folder. This one thicker, worn edges, tabs sticking out. I dropped it next to the first. You want the full picture? Here. Dad didn't move. Mom opened the folder slowly, like she was expecting a trap. Inside were my tax returns, bank statements, W-2s from 5 years back, and 2 old business cards, one from the finance job, one from the farm. She held them like they were fake IDs. You were in asset management, she asked. 6 years, I said. Portfolio analysis, risk modeling, fund research. I ran numbers for people who made 10 times what I ever will. Dad finally leaned forward. When did this happen? Graduated, got the offer, moved to Chicago, started at 32 a year, and was clearing 6 figures by year 4. I didn't blow it. I saved, I invested, lived lean, stacked cash. Mom flipped through a few 1,099s. But we thought, you were a nonprofit. I pivoted, I said. Burned out. Got tired of spreadsheets and shallow suits. I wanted something real. So I came back here and started the Urban Farming Project. Dad frowned. And that pays enough to cover this mortgage. There is no mortgage, I said. I paid cash. His eyes snapped up. Cash. I nodded. Found the listing late one night, foreclosure from a property auction site. Underpriced and sitting there for weeks. I moved fast. Bought it through a holding company so I wouldn't get undercut by flippers. They both just sat there. You never said anything, Mom murmured, still flipping through pages like they might rearrange themselves into a version that made more sense. You never asked. Dad shook his head. We didn't even know you left finance. Because the second I said I was working in food justice, you assumed I was struggling, poor, settling. You were in a nonprofit, Mom said, defensive now. It's a fair assumption. No, I shot back. It's your assumption. Because to you, simple equals failure. Quiet equals lost. They didn't respond. I leaned against the wall and watched them study the documents like they were late for a final exam. You both thought I was just surviving here, I said, like I was clinging to a lifestyle I couldn't afford. But you never asked how I got here. You just assumed the worst. Mom's fingers trembled slightly as she turned a page. These returns, you made more than your father at one point. I know. Dad let out a slow breath through his nose, like the math was starting to sting. I never told you because I knew exactly how this would go. You'd take it as a challenge, try to redirect it. Mom looked up. We just wanted to make sure you were okay. No, I said. You wanted to make sure I was your version of okay. The room went quiet again. No papers shuffling, no arguments. Just the sound of them reprocessing the story they thought they knew. Dad finally asked, so this is it. You're just gonna stay here. Farm vegetables and what? Sell at farmers markets. I laughed once. That's the question, not how I saved 6 figures before 30. He didn't answer. I pointed to the second business card. That nonprofit, it runs 2 grant-funded programs, and I sit on a regional food policy council. I'm not just planting carrots in the dirt. Mom pressed the deed flat with her hand. Why didn't you tell us you were doing so well? Because you only hear what fits your plan. Anything else, you label it a phase. Dad stood up, slow, hands in his pockets. No response. Mom kept staring at my tax forms like maybe somehow the numbers were lying. Dad stood there, staring down at the folder like it had betrayed him. Mom still hadn't put the deed down. For a second, it felt like maybe they were finally getting it, like the facts had cut through all the noise. Then Dad slipped. He rubbed the back of his neck and muttered, well, your uncle said the eviction notice would at least get you to call us back. I froze. What eviction notice? The air snapped. Mom's head whipped toward him like she'd just been shoved. Larry, she hissed. I stepped forward. What? Eviction? Notice. Dad tried to wave it off. It wasn't real. Just something to... Where is it? Mom hesitated, eyes flicking to the folder in her lap. Now, I said. Slowly, like she was unwrapping a live wire, she opened a side pocket in the folder and pulled out a single folded page. The kind of thick, crisp paper government notices get printed on. Black header, all caps font. A mock city seal in the corner. She handed it to me without a word. I unfolded it and read, Notice to vacate. Due to lease, violations and pending transfer of property rights. My name, this address, fake violations. Noise complaints, failure to maintain. A deadline, a threat of police removal if I didn't vacate within 10 days. My hands shook. This isn't even close to legal, I said, voice tight. Mom tried to explain. It was just a bluff. We knew you'd never talk to us seriously unless you forged legal documents. Dad held up a hand. We didn't file anything. It was just a draft, something to get your attention. You used Uncle Rich to pass it along. Mom nodded slowly. He said you trust him. We thought it'd hit harder coming from someone neutral. You thought a fake eviction notice would motivate me. We were trying to break the pattern, Dad said. You ignore our calls, you brush off everything we say. We had to do something. I stepped back, gripping the page like it might burst into flames. This is fraud. No, it's not, Dad snapped. It's not filed. It's not official. You used a city seal. It's a mock-up, Mom said quickly. Not real. You impersonated a city office, used my full legal name and listed fake violations. That's not a joke. That's criminal. Dad started pacing. You're blowing this out of proportion. You should have seen it for what it was. A push. No, I see it exactly for what it is. Mom stood now too. Look, we didn't mean to scare you. We thought maybe you'd call, ask questions, open a door. You forged an eviction notice? I said louder now. That's not a scare tactic. That's desperation. They went quiet. I walked over to the dining table and set the fake notice down flat, smoothing the corners. My heart was pounding. Not from fear, from disbelief. Anger. I looked up. You think you know what's best for me, so you tried to force it. You didn't even stop to think about what lines you were crossing. Mom said, barely above a whisper, we thought it would lead to a conversation. No, I said. You thought it would corner me. You wanted me scared enough to surrender. Dad dropped into the nearest chair, rubbed his face like he was the victim. I don't even know who you are, I said. He looked up. We're your parents, and that's supposed to excuse this? They didn't answer. I picked up the fake notice again, folded it in half, and walked to the kitchen drawer where I keep my actual legal documents. I placed it on top, not out of sentiment, out of evidence. They started talking again the second I closed the drawer. Defensive, desperate. It wasn't meant to go that far, Mom said. You're twisting it into something ugly. Dad pointed a finger. Don't act like you haven't ignored us for years. We've tried everything else. So you thought the next step was forgery? It wasn't forgery, he barked. It was a document. A warning. Nobody got hurt. I walked over to the counter and picked up my phone. What are you doing? Mom asked, voice tightening. I looked her in the eye. You said you'd call the police if I didn't cooperate, right? She blinked. That's not... Let's do that. Her mouth dropped open. I dialed. Calm, steady. The way you do when you've already made your choice. Dad stepped forward. Wait, 911, what's your emergency? Yes, I said. I need officers at my residence. My parents showed up uninvited and presented me with a fake legal eviction notice. They forged city documents and are refusing to leave. That's when they started panicking. Wait, hold on. Let's not blow this out of proportion, Dad said, reaching for the phone. I turned away from him. Yes, I have the deed to the property. Yes, I'm safe. No weapons, no violence. But they won't leave and they're trying to manipulate me using false documents. Mom tried to grab the folder off the table. I stepped in front of her. Ma'am, the dispatcher asked, do they still have access to the house? Yes, but I'm asking them to leave now. Officers are en route. Thank you. I ended the call and set the phone down slowly. You didn't have to do that, Mom said, face pale. You forged city documents, I said again. You escalated. Now I'm doing the same. We're your parents, she whispered. Exactly. Dad stood frozen, like he didn't believe I'd actually gone through with it. 5 minutes later, 2 squad cars pulled up, lights off but fast. When the officers came to the door, I met them with the folder already open. I handed one of them the fake eviction notice, the deed to the property, and pointed straight at my parents. They created this. It's not real. I own the house. They won't leave. The first officer scanned the papers and nodded. The second turned to my dad. Sir, do you understand that presenting a document like this could be considered fraud? Dad's face went flat. We didn't submit it. But you used it to intimidate the property owner. Mom stepped forward, shaky. It was just to get his attention. The second cop looked at me. You said they threatened police involvement if you didn't comply. Yes, multiple times, in person and over text. He turned back to them. That's harassment. You're on private property. This isn't a dispute over rent. This is a fraudulent attempt to take control of someone else's legal residence. Dad tried again. We're just family trying to help. The first cop raised a brow. By impersonating a government agency. They didn't answer. The word fraud hit like a gunshot. Then came harassment, then trespassing. My parents stood there, pale, silent, as 2 strangers finally made it clear that this wasn't just family tension. It was illegal. The officers asked if I wanted to press charges. I didn't answer. Not yet. Mom clutched her purse with both hands like it was holding her together. Dad was looking anywhere but at me. You need to leave, one officer said flatly. Now. They walked out without another word. Not even a glance back. One of the officers turned to me, notepad in hand. You want to press charges? I looked straight at my parents standing stiff in the doorway. Mom wouldn't meet my eyes. Dad's jaw was locked like a vice. No, I said. Not right now. The officer nodded. But if they come back, I will. He looked between us. Fair warning's been given. The other officer gestured toward the door. You're both being ordered to leave the property immediately. Do not return without written consent from the homeowner. Dad opened his mouth like he had something righteous to say, but stopped himself. They shuffled toward the door. No folder, no schedule. Just the weight of everything they'd done, now stuck to their backs like wet cement. Right at the doorframe, Dad turned. We were just trying to help. I held up the folded eviction notice. Then you should have asked first. He didn't answer. Just walked out with Mom behind him, slow like they'd aged 10 years in 20 minutes. I watched the cruiser pull away before I locked the door. The silence that followed hit hard. Not peaceful, not heavy. Just full. No tension. No pacing footsteps. No clipped voices talking over each other. I walked back to the kitchen and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee. Sat down at the counter, both hands wrapped around the mug. The folder was still there, but what caught my eye was the empty condo brochure they'd left behind. Perfect little starter unit. Stainless steel appliances, smiling strangers living someone else's version of a good life. I picked it up by the corner and slid it off the edge of the counter. Let it fall. I didn't need a presentation. I didn't need a pitch. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation for how I lived my life. Not my choices, not my home, not my bank account, not my job title. They walked into my house thinking they were fixing me. All they really did was show me exactly how much I'd outgrown needing their approval. The first few phone calls after they left were stiff. No apologies at first, just awkward silences, clipped phrases, and a lot of "we just thought." Like that explained everything. But eventually, Mom said the words, "We're sorry. For the document. For pushing. We got carried away." I believed her. Sort of. They were sorry it blew up. Not sorry for trying to control everything. We had multiple conversations. Long, tense ones where nobody raised their voice but every sentence felt like a chess move. Dad sat quiet through most of them, arms crossed, nodding like he was just letting it happen. But when I explained, really explained, why I live the way I do, even he couldn't argue with the numbers. "I'm not living small," I told them. "I'm living free. No debt, no stress. I grow my own food. I choose my hours. I choose peace." Mom didn't say much to that. Just looked at me like she still couldn't wrap her head around someone choosing less. On purpose. A few weeks later, she texted to tell me the condo had sold. Westview Park. 1 bedroom, in-unit laundry, granite countertops, gone to someone else now. I didn't respond. Meanwhile, the value of my property kept climbing. I had 2 offers from realtors who'd found out about the foreclosure deal and wanted to flip it for profit. I said no. One afternoon, I opened the drawer where I'd left the fake eviction notice, smoothed it out, slid it into a cheap black frame, and hung it on the wall above my desk in the home office. Not out of spite. Not as some weird trophy. As a reminder. Because sometimes, the most dangerous thing family can do isn't yell or insult or criticize. It's assume they know what's best for you and move on it without ever asking.